It started with nothing more than an umbrella and a moment of sympathy. Every morning, I'd watch the neighborhood kids, backpacks slung over their shoulders, shoes soaked through, huddled like ducklings beneath the thin cover of a shared raincoat, waiting for the school bus in the pouring rain. The stop was at the end of our cul-de-sac, unmarked and unsheltered, just a patch of grass beside the curb. I didn't have children myself, but something about their silent endurance tugged at me. So, I spent a quiet weekend building a small covered bench, using reclaimed wood from a fence project and a few sturdy weather-resistant panels I had stored in my garage. It wasn't anything elaborate, just a simple shelter with a bench beneath it and a slanted roof to keep the water off, but it was solid, safe, and gave those kids a dry place to wait for their ride. I even added reflective tape to the posts for visibility and a small sign that read, "For our little scholars." It was an act of kindness, pure and uncomplicated. I figured the community would appreciate it. I figured wrong. By Monday morning, before the kids could even take their seats beneath the shelter, I found a bright pink citation taped to the wooden post, flapping angrily in the wind. Karen Wilcox, the HOA president and self-appointed sheriff of suburban law, had left her mark. I barely had time to pour my coffee when she appeared on my front porch, a clipboard in hand and a frown so deep it looked chiseled into her face. "Unauthorized structure," she barked, as if I'd erected a nightclub on the sidewalk. I tried to explain. It was for the children, it was safe, it cost the HOA nothing, but she cut me off with a dismissive wave. "The bylaws are clear," she said. "Any structural additions to common areas must be approved in advance." She handed me a formal notice of violation and a $200 fine. It wasn't about safety, or aesthetics, or common sense. It was about power. I could see it in her eyes, that glint of smug satisfaction that comes from enforcing rules simply because you can. I reviewed the HOA bylaws myself that evening. Nowhere did it specifically prohibit temporary, non-invasive shelters for public safety, especially when no permanent foundation was laid. I sent a polite email to Karen, outlining the reasons the bench served a legitimate purpose and posed no threat to community values or property. I included photos, testimonies from 2 nearby parents, and even a copy of the neighborhood's beautification guidelines, which, ironically, encouraged residents to contribute positively to shared spaces. Her reply came within hours, cold, clipped, and definitive. "The bench remains in violation," she wrote. "Failure to remove it within 48 hours will result in additional fines." The irony was sharp. A community that celebrated block parties and festive yard decorations was now drawing the line at a rain bench. Karen, however, wasn't interested in logic. She wanted the bench gone. And she wanted me to be the one who backed down. Not one to concede so easily, I submitted an official request to the HOA board, complete with signatures from 10 local residents who supported the bench. I even attached a maintenance plan, promising to keep the area clean and safe at my own expense. For a moment, I believed I'd made a solid case. But when the letter came back, it was stamped "Denied" in bold red ink. No explanation. Just that single, final word. 2 days later, a new notice was placed on my mailbox. The fine had increased to $500. The message was clear. Karen was escalating, and she expected me to fold. But every time I looked out my window and saw those kids sitting dry and comfortable under that bench, kicking their feet and chatting while the rain poured down, I knew I couldn't give in. This wasn't about a structure anymore. It was about standing up to someone who thought rules were weapons, not guidelines. What Karen hadn't anticipated was the neighborhood's response. Word spread fast, first through whispers at the bus stop, then through shared texts and community Facebook posts. One by one, other parents began to pitch in. Someone brought a set of waterproof cushions. Another neighbor added a plastic storage bin filled with extra ponchos and hand warmers. A father who worked in construction dropped off a laminated sign with bus safety tips. It became a little hub of warmth and community spirit, something organic, something good. Children began to leave cheerful drawings pinned under the roof. The bench had transformed from a practical gesture into a quiet rebellion against the cold bureaucracy that Karen represented. People didn't just like the bench, they loved what it stood for. And with every small improvement, it became harder for Karen to argue it was a blight. Still, she remained undeterred, redoubling her efforts to stamp it out, though now, she wasn't just fighting me. She was fighting a neighborhood waking up to her tyranny. Karen's next move wasn't just about the bench, it was about sending a message. When she realized community support was growing and her authority was being quietly challenged, she turned her attention to me personally. Within a week, I received 3 new violations. My grass was half an inch too tall, my trash bins were visible from the street for more than 24 hours, and, most ridiculous of all, my portable basketball hoop, which had stood in the driveway for 2 years without a single complaint, was now deemed a hazard. Each citation came with its own fine and a typed note bearing Karen's signature in that same passive-aggressive font. She'd clearly been surveilling my property, waiting to pounce on anything she could twist into an infraction. I began documenting everything: photos, timestamps, even setting up a motion-activated camera by the garage. But the real toll wasn't financial, it was psychological. Every morning, I braced for another envelope taped to my door, another petty power play. Karen wasn't just trying to remove a bench anymore, she was trying to break I wasn't the first. As I vented my frustrations to neighbors, during walks, at the mailbox, while watering the garden, I began to hear their stories too. Karen had fined one family $150 for painting their front door an unsanctioned shade of blue. She'd harassed a veteran for flying a flag that was too large for his yard. A mother of 3 had been fined repeatedly for sidewalk chalk drawings, which Karen described as graffiti. It was always the same pattern. She wielded the HOA rulebook like a sword, slashing at anything that didn't align with her rigid, joyless vision of the neighborhood. But most people had chosen to quietly comply, afraid of drawing more attention to themselves. That's what made the bench different. It had become a symbol, not just of community, but of resistance. And slowly, those quiet stories started to become louder. Neighbors began to keep records of their own, to challenge her claims, to show up at board meetings they'd never previously attended. The bench had sparked something Karen didn't expect: unity. The turning point came on a gray Thursday morning. Rain was coming down in heavy sheets, and the bus was running late. A group of children, maybe 8 or 9, were gathered beneath the bench's roof, laughing and sharing a pack of gummy bears. I was standing at my mailbox when I saw her, Karen, power walking toward the stop in her trademark beige raincoat, clipboard in one hand, phone in the other. Without a word, she marched up to the kids and began shouting, "This is not an approved shelter. Off the property. No." The children froze, unsure if they were in trouble. A few began to cry. One little girl, maybe 6, clung to the wooden post and whimpered. Karen reached forward, as if to physically remove them. That's when I ran over, positioning myself between her and the kids, my voice calm but firm. "You are not touching these children," I said. "Back away." Her face turned crimson, a mixture of fury and disbelief. She took out her phone and began filming, declaring she was documenting illegal occupancy of common grounds by minors. It would have been laughable, if it hadn't been so terrifying. Unbeknownst to either of us, a county vehicle had pulled up at the corner. Dr. Angela Chambers, the superintendent of the county school district, had been planning a visit to another campus that morning but had stopped when she saw the commotion. She stepped out of her car just in time to witness Karen's tirade and the children's distress. Dressed in a tailored coat and heels, she crossed the wet pavement with quiet authority and approached us. "What's going on here?" she asked, looking directly at Karen. Karen launched into a flustered explanation, full of terms like liability and unauthorized use of land. But Dr. Chambers cut her off. "You were yelling at these children," she asked, "and attempting to remove them, physically?" Karen tried to pivot, claiming she was ensuring safety. Dr. Chambers didn't buy it. She turned to me and asked if I'd built the structure. When I nodded, she smiled faintly and said, "It's well done. And frankly, I see a safety measure, not a threat." Then she added, louder this time, "What I do see is a grown woman harassing minors in public." Karen's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Dr. Chambers stayed for nearly an hour, interviewing the children, speaking with parents who had gathered after hearing the commotion, and reviewing the incident on a neighbor's doorbell camera. She took notes, took names, and took it seriously. Within a day, I received a call from her office. She wanted to file a formal report with the county, documenting Karen's actions as a potential case of child endangerment and harassment. Apparently, HOA authority did not extend to disciplining or removing minors from public spaces, especially not in a way that caused emotional distress. Karen's behavior was deemed not just inappropriate but potentially actionable. The school district began reviewing its own transportation safety protocols and released a public statement praising community efforts to support student well-being. Karen, meanwhile, was silent. No threats, no fines, no emails. For the first time since the bench had gone up, she had retreated into the shadows. But the damage was done. Only now, it was her credibility that was crumbling, not mine. The incident at the bus stop spread faster than anyone expected. A parent posted a video of Karen shouting at the children to the neighborhood Facebook group, and from there, it went viral. Comments flooded in, outraged, empathetic, and incredulous. Former residents chimed in with their own Karen stories, and others who had been too afraid to speak up now found courage in numbers. Screenshots of citations, messages from Karen, and HOA meeting transcripts were shared openly, painting a damning picture of a woman who had long been allowed to bully with impunity. One neighbor compiled everything into a public Google Drive folder titled The Karen Wilcox Files. A local news station even picked up the story, airing a short segment about the bus stop battle and the neighborhood's struggle to reclaim decency from an overzealous HOA leader. More than ever, the community rallied, not just around the bench, but around each other. There was a sense of collective outrage, yes, but also of hope. People finally felt heard. It didn't take long before pressure reached a boiling point. With overwhelming public backlash, the HOA board had no choice but to act. A petition to remove Karen from her position gained over 150 signatures in just 2 days, more than half the neighborhood. An emergency HOA meeting was called. That night, the community center overflowed with residents, many standing in the back or listening through the open doors. Karen sat at the head of the table, defiant and tight-lipped. But her usual air of authority had faded, replaced by a brittle defensiveness. Parents stood one by one, recounting how she had fined, harassed, or belittled them. Someone read a statement from a lawyer outlining the legal liability she had exposed the HOA to. Then Dr. Chambers spoke, addressing the board with composure and clarity. "This is not leadership," she said. "It's a liability." When the vote was finally called, not a single hand went up in her favor. Karen Wilcox was removed as HOA president by unanimous decision. There was no applause, just a quiet, collective exhale, as if a storm had finally passé. Karen didn't take her removal gracefully. The very next day, she attempted to confront me outside my house, shouting that I'd manipulated everyone and sabotaged her leadership. She crossed into my yard, ignored multiple warnings to leave, and then knocked over my trash bins in a fit of rage. It was all caught on my security camera, which I promptly submitted with a police report. Within 48 hours, I was granted a temporary restraining order. The county also began reviewing charges, specifically for child endangerment, harassment, and trespassing. Several parents filed their own complaints, and one family pursued civil action for emotional trauma inflicted on their daughter during the bus stop incident. The HOA, eager to distance themselves from Karen, cooperated fully with the investigations. As the legal news tightened, Karen vanished from public view. Her beige SUV no longer parked on the corner. Her once daily patrols ceased. For the first time in years, the neighborhood began to breathe without her looming shadow. 2 weeks after Karen's removal, I received an unexpected letter from the school district. Dr. Chambers had personally written to thank me for my compassionate civic initiative, and informed me that the district was exploring the idea of installing similar bus stop shelters throughout the county. They asked if I'd be willing to consult on the design. The local news revisited the story with a follow-up segment, From HOA Fine to County-Wide Reform. My neighbors stopped by with baked goods and thank-you notes. A local boy gave me a drawing of the bench with stick figure kids smiling underneath it. Even people who had once kept their heads down were now volunteering for HOA committees, determined to bring accountability and balance back to the organization. As for the bench, it stood proud and unbothered, its roof now adorned with colorful wind chimes and painted handprints from the kids. What had started as a simple act of kindness had become a catalyst for change, and the end, the great irony, was undeniable. Karen had spent years building her little empire of fear and control, wielding bylaws like weapons and silencing anyone who questioned her authority. Yet it was that very obsession with control, her refusal to allow even one small, unapproved bench, that unraveled everything. She could have said nothing. She could have quietly appreciated the gesture, or even taken credit for it. But instead, she chose battle. She chose ego. And in doing so, she exposed the depths of her own insecurity and malice. Her downfall wasn't orchestrated by a powerful enemy, but by her inability to accept a simple act of community kindness. And the neighborhood, once silenced by her rule, had found its voice, loud, clear, and united. As the children laughed beneath the shelter each morning, dry and safe, their joy became the ultimate vindication. The bench remained. Karen did not.